On the subject of weight, I didn't diet. I realized I had an unhealthy relationship with food. And I want to say up front, the process of living a long, radically long life is in fact a luxury. It is not affordable by many people. I was in a position to afford it by circumstance and economically. But ultimately I said to myself, Mark, you have stuff in your refrigerator you should never eat. And yet, not only do you eat it, but you eat it unconsciously.
Will you still need me? Will you still feed me when I'm 64?
And now the podcast where together we discuss proactive aging on your terms, connecting to the professional advice of our special guests while creating better days throughout the aging process. Now here's your host, Mark Turnbull.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another lively discussion on aging today. We are the podcast where together we're exploring the many options to aging on your terms. You can find Aging Today and our past 8 years of programming. All you got to do is go to www.agingtoday.us. And I want to thank every one of you over the past 8 years that have been following us. And we're excited that 2025 is here, and we've got a whole array of new conversations that we're going to be discussing in 25. So hang on, strap in, and let's go. Well, in the United States, the average lifespan in the 1900s was 43. Today, 2020, 78. And the longest recorded lifespan is a French woman by the name of Jean Clement. She lived 122 years from 1875 to 1997. That's pretty remarkable. One thing is certain that I can tell you is that since the 1900s and since the dawn of man, our lifespans are growing. They're getting longer. And that is true of today. But can we reach a lifespan of 150? Could that be a norm? Could that be the average? Well, our guest today, Mark Cofano, says yes. And his journey, his goal is 150. And he is well on his way. And so we're going to be discussing with him. Mark, welcome to Aging Today. And I look forward to our conversation.
Well, me too. And wow, I learned that you've been doing this for 8 years, which I didn't know. That's really wonderful because to focus on the subject of aging for 8 years makes you very singularly informed.
Yeah.
So I want to learn from you too.
Well, actually, I'm not as informed as you might think, but I'm constantly growing and I'm learning from all great people like yourself, all of the guests that we've had on over the years. And I just keep growing and growing in my knowledge. And, we apply it in the marketplace on a regular basis. We own an in-home care agency and a hospice agency. So
Wow.
we're trying to make sure that we use this as a platform to reach the world on the aging progression and answering all the questions that people have about the aging process.
Makes perfect sense to me. I'm excited. How can I be helpful?
Well, you've got a goal of 150. But before we get in there, let's kind of go back. We always start our segment out with getting to know you a little bit better. And we're not interested in so much what's in your wallet, but we are interested in what's in your story. Every one of us has a life story. Kind of give us an update of where you've been for the past, I think you're 69. Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah, 69.
Yep. I'm 67. So I'm right there on your tail. We're the tail end of the baby boomers. And so kind of give us a little bit of a background of where you've been.
Well, I'm a person that has always been curious and not always curious in things which are great, but curious nonetheless. Sometimes you all of a sudden, put the hose where it's not supposed to go or the fork in the light socket. Sometimes things are shocking. And in the process of which I've had many experiences in my life where curiosity has sometimes been uncomfortable, but nonetheless, it's the nature of who it is I am. I question everything. And so one aspect of this journey to 150 was really coming from the perspective of just wondering what was possible. And I would say that as people, particularly in the United States, we're inclined to get a lot of messaging, a lot more because of social media. And About 5 or 6 years ago, I had an experience which made me curious on the subject of aging. It was actually that I was giving a speech, and I do a fairly good amount of speaking as a futurist. So a large county in the United States asked me to come in and talk to them about how the future was going to affect them. And in particular, the conclusion that we came to is they were going to experience a lot of job loss, like 35% job loss in just 15 years of time. And I went through this whole process, and people loved the speech. And wouldn't you know, they did a video and someone took some pictures of me. And when I got the pictures expecting to see this dapper guy on stage, I realized, because it was a candid picture, I wasn't very dapper. I was kind of chubby.
Yeah.
That'd be the nice way to say it. So without getting into a bunch of gory details, seeing myself clearly through the lens of something which wasn't my own eyes, not a selfie pic, but a reality check, I realized that I had become very different than the person I thought I was. So that was epiphany number one. Epiphany number two is I got to watch mom and dad, and we're an Italian family, a loving Italian family, and we've lost both mom and dad in the last 4 years. I got to watch the end of their life. I don't know if your parents are still alive, but the truth is that when you get to the end for your parents, your world changes just because it's a context.
Yeah,
And what I learned,
mom is still alive. She's 95. She's
wonderful,
upstairs
wonderful.
from where I'm recording this. Dad passed away at 93 just 2 years ago. So,
well, we had a similar experience
yep.
then, because my dad was 94 and mom passed at 93 and a half. So I guess I have longevity genes from this perspective of what you said, not 78 being the average. But what I would also tell you as well, I definitely appreciated my parents' life, 67 years married and together the entire time. I noticed at the end, it wasn't exactly the end I wanted. I felt like in both cases, my parents probably left some years on the table because no one had shared some of the information that I've gained over the last 4 years about how actually to extend your life by virtue of how you conduct yourself. So, first of all, being what I considered at that stage in the game about 75 pounds too heavy, 2 pounds a year times 25 years plus pasta, because as an Italian guy, I love pasta. I realized that if I didn't do something different, I was going to end up probably older than 90, because everybody in our family seems to do well, but maybe not having the end I wanted. And in the process of which I said to myself, I want something better. So ultimately, what that translated into is 90 plus something is what I wanted. And my first goal, I just put a little sticky on my refrigerator, 110. I don't know why I picked 110. It didn't seem so hard. And you already mentioned Jean Clement, who lived to 122. So I wasn't even doing something that would be quote unquote impossible. And then I started to get curious. I got curious about longevity, and I started to read and study human biology and some of the amazing things happening at Harvard and at Stanford, and people putting not only a lot of time and energy into how to do this, but actually the cadence of something that I refer to as hyperchange. Now, remember I said I was a futurist? One of the things I determined was that the rate of change was so extraordinary in our world that we could not use the past as a predictor for how things would go in the future. An example, the very first antibiotic was created in do you know when?
19, was it 2?
1927.
Oh, 27. Okay.
We haven't even had 100 years of antibiotic, and it didn't get wide use until the World War II. So imagine if you cut your arm and it was one of those cuts where maybe some stuff got into the cut. Back in 1925, 30, because antibiotics had just been created, you might have the uncomfortable choice of actually having to have your arm cut off or lose your life. And that wasn't even 100 years ago.
Yeah.
And today, if you happen to have prostate surgery, it's a odds-on bet that if it's in the United States, it's going to be done by a robot, not a surgeon, a Da Vinci robot, because they can cut the skin off a grape and sew it back on, which isn't the skill of a traditional human. So I said to myself, oh my gosh, if in less than 100 years we've gone from not even having antibiotics to having all the surgeries for a particular type of cancer happen by a robot, what's going to happen in the next 100 years? And that caused me to realize one very basic thing. We are going to have a change in science, medicine, and the way we look at the human body, which is going to mean that in about 30 years, around what I call my 100-year mark, we're going to have 500 years of science. Not 30 years, 500. Artificial intelligence and robotics and new ways to think. So then I said to myself, probably 110. It's not a good enough guess. And so I said to myself, well, pick something. And I went out there and I looked, and wouldn't you know, other people had picked 150. Some had picked 200. And I said, well, I want something that's striking enough to motivate me and impossible enough to get some attention. So that's where 150 came from. Is that a good answer?
Yeah, it's an excellent one. And you know, I think that you're on the right path, because we've had many of our guests that have come on and said some of the same things. And I think the future is going to be very, very exciting. What do you say to those that are the naysayers that are saying, "Oh, come on. Why do you want to live to 150?" I've heard this over and over again.
Well, interestingly enough, and I was sharing with you before we started our podcast, that if someone were to go to ageist.com, ageist.com, they'll find an article about me. A very nice man by the name of David Stewart runs that publication. And they asked me that very question. And my answer was, I love you if you don't think I'm going to make it. Because naysayers make me contemplate a very difficult journey. There's no question about what I'm doing is difficult. And I don't find criticism in any which way, shape, or form not what I want. Please tell me, because it might be that I'm going to learn something. So that's the first thing. I like it. And second of all, you know, I want to be inspirational. And if maybe I just change the perspective of one person who then lives a better life because they learned something about my journey, perhaps that makes this whole thing worthwhile. So asking people to contemplate something they don't think is possible and having them later determine on their own, hey, maybe he has a point, that's a good thing.
Yeah, absolutely. What is ageism? I mean, there's a lot of, do you have a definition, a good working definition of what ageism is? Because I think it's prevalent in our culture, and I love visionaries. I love people that have that pioneer spirit in them, and people that are usually, you know, slamming people like you, the glass is half empty.
Well, I don't know that I have a definition of ageism that will satisfy everyone, but what I can say this is it is like every other ism. It's applying a series of predefined measurements or expectations to someone without knowing the details. So whether it is racism or any other kind of way of looking at things, it just says, I'm going to take a snapshot of what I see on the outside, and I'm going to use that as a tool to determine what's on the inside. And in many cases, ageism in our world, both against people that are older as well as people that are younger, is not a positive thing. So when we all of a sudden say that someone is too old for this job, maybe we ought to interview them and find out. When we say that someone is too young to know something, maybe we ought to talk to them and find out if that's true. So I would say that there are some aspects of ageism which are not helpful, and we ought to be very careful to educate people to not be, to have that ism. And ageism is completely normal. It's built in biologically. Part of that has to do with this basic issue of procreation. When a man is older, his sperm does not have the same motility and health as when he's younger. And the same thing for a woman and her ovum. The reality is nature favors in some regards youth, and it puts some cues in place that says, hey, youthfulness matters. Okay, so what I would tell you is when I was young and 20 and out having fun, it was not my nature to all of a sudden find the oldest people and bring them along for the fun. I don't think that was unusual. I really think that when you're young, you seek the company of younger people. And when you're older, it could be the very same thing. You don't necessarily want to have someone who's playing the music you don't like or understand in your presence. And yet, there's a lot to be said for when we cross the boundaries of those assumptions, we sometimes have a lot of fun. And in
Absolutely.
particular for me, I hang around almost exclusively younger people.
Uh-huh.
And the reason why, unfortunately, and I hate to say this, is many of the people that are our age, I'm 69, they bring to the conversation of longevity something which is kind of negative for me.
Uh-huh.
And it's my knees hurt and I can't do that anymore. And why do you want to live that long? And that's not natural. Or what would God think? Or you're going to wreck Social Security or. And I'm saying to myself, all okay, have whatever position you want, but can we maintain positivity? So I would say even as an older person, do I practice some ageism? Yes, I do. I
Well,
prefer younger people and don't spend as much time around older ones.
and I think that, if you go back to the biblical records, Methuselah, 800, I think it was 800 years old.
962 years.
962, yeah. So obviously the world was, less, it had a lot of less pollution, a lot of less of everything, and things were calmer. And I think that, when people say, well, God didn't design us that way, I beg to differ, that he did originally, design us to live long, good, healthy lives. And we are the ones that get in the way of shortening that lifespan.
Thank you very much for saying that. I absolutely believe that most of us have a legacy of longevity that we discard. And we have some encouragement from society because society wants us to follow the plan. Leaves dying in the forest create mulch and is good for the forest. And humans dying in a cycle that people can understand, manage to make money off of, also makes sense to society. So when someone such as myself and other people that are living to what we would call radical longevity do something like this, we are bucking a lot of normalcy.
Yeah, absolutely. So I always, when I see propositions, theories, I always put in the margin YBH. YBH. Yes, but how? So let's look at it. I want to say yes to 150, but how? And so let's kind of take a step back, and there's a couple of words that you use that I want us to clarify, like hyperchange. What is going on in our culture today? What is hyperchange, and how is that attributing to your goal of 150?
Well, okay, first of all, let me redefine hyperchange into a simple catchphrase that everyone can latch onto. 100 years of change in your next 10. In the earliest stages of human history, big changes like the Iron Age or agriculture took 1,000 years. We had multiple generations of time to understand something new, to get used to it and incorporate it into the way we deal with things. Then it became not 1,000 years, it became 500 years, and then it became 200. And around the 1700s, there was an interesting thing that happened. A lot of people are unaware that the original term innovator was preceded by a word called novator. A novator was someone who did not pay attention, who did not follow along. And at that time in history, you could kind of get yourself in trouble if you were a novator. An example of a novator would be Copernicus, who said, well, the earth isn't the center of the universe. The Catholic Church was not amused. And his compensation for that was 600 years in an unmarked grave. Now, was it true? Yes. Was it popular? No. Was he a novator? Yes. And did he get a just reward? Well, some people would say at that time, yes, because you're upsetting people. But in retrospect, we would look at that and say maybe the world would have been better if more people were aware that the earth wasn't the center of the universe sooner. So if you take that concept of it was 1,000 years, then it was 500, then it was 200, we got to the point in time where not only was it okay to innovate, but it actually became economically interesting. There didn't used to be VCs. There didn't used to be startups. There didn't used to be this idea that you could all of a sudden take an idea, go down to the coffee shop and find somebody who'll give you some money, hire a bunch of people and take your dog and your buddies and all of a sudden go boom. That didn't exist. And if you look at many of the things that we enjoy today in society, it's driven by a completely different kind of engine. So hyperchange goes back to about the 1700s, and there's about 8 critical things that occurred to make it possible. But what I would tell you is we created a factory of change. Not change that was accidental, but actually an engine that cranks it out. Does that make sense? So
yeah, absolutely. You mentioned there's about 8 of them. What are a couple of those change
Well, the very
agents?
first one was a communication system. So back in the days of Morse code, ... dash,
Yeah.
dash, ...
Yeah.
There was no way to get a message anywhere, right? We were limited for the most part to paper mail or some kind of physical conference of a message. That was like a really, really big thing. And ultimately, the roots of the internet were born from telegraph, which then
Sure.
went along. And then we had the broader issue of,
Well, you can even go back. You could even go back further to the printing press. Would that change the world?
of course you could.
You can.
Yes, you could.
Yeah, you can. Yeah.
I'm going to let everyone kind of come to their own conclusions about what they think. I'm just telling you, I sort of chronicled it. And my belief is, as an example, that when you all of a sudden have this thing called a microprocessor, it's really a consequential thing. It really is changing the way that we relate to data by abstracting it. So I've been, the course of most of my life, deeply involved in technology. And I've had the good fortune of working with some very, very interesting companies to create the future. And I believed at one point in time that everything would in fact be connected, including us as people. So I witnessed the very first mobile phone, the very first copier on the network, the very first internet website, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I said to myself, this whole business about everything being connected is just an extension of the first Morse code. It's just an amplification, one more thing. And the other thing I'll mention about hyperchange is that we often talk about the future as if it is a singularity. There's just one thing, one future. Well, in truth, that's not at all so. You have a future and I have a future, and there might be very different purely based upon where we live. There's some places that do have flying cars, and there's other places that have tractors that shoot the weeds with lasers. So the question is, do those things exist in everyone's future? No. And can we contemplate them all? No. So where a lot of the challenge from hyperchange comes from is that we are in a place where without the data, we're at risk for being surprised. And when you're a little kid, a surprise is a pony under the Christmas tree. But when you're a 40-year-old, the surprise is a roof you have to replace and you don't have the money for it. So I would generally say, most adults would say less surprises, more planning. So if you take artificial intelligence as an example, it kind of came on the scene to the public view about how long ago? 3-4 years, where all of a sudden became kind of a bigger deal. But it's been worked on for 60 years. So is artificial intelligence in the present now, or was it in the present 20 years ago? Depends on what future you were living in.
Mm-hmm. What are the barriers to 150? What are some of the things that you see that?
Gosh, many.
Yeah.
Many.
Can you?
Probably the number one and biggest one for a human is cognitive decline.
Mm-hmm.
So at this particular juncture in time, around 30% of people at 85 have some material cognitive decline. And by the time you get to 95, the answer is probably closer to 50%, maybe 60%. So why would somebody want to live to 150 if only 2/3 of the way to that goal, they don't have their marbles?
Mm-hmm.
So I would say out of all the things I can imagine, that is probably the most difficult one. The second one I would say has to do with this issue about how long does our body want us to continue? There is something called the Hayflick limit, which has to do with how many times a cell will divide before it simply stops doing it anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And some of that can be tested in the Petri dish, and some of that can be simulated in the body, but we don't absolutely know that Mark Turnbull will behave like Mark Cofano, and yours might go a lot longer and mine might stop. So anecdotally, we know that there's the concept of a limit, how many times your cells will divide, but we don't know officially how it will get expressed.
Yeah.
And the third thing, I guess,
Do you think
categorically,
that that's biologically written into our DNA?
well, some people would posit that.
Yeah.
I mean, some really smart people that study this stuff. So I'm not, I've become an aging scientist, but only by virtue of my personal journey. I never woke up wanting to know about the Hayflick limit, but you keep reading and you go, oh,
yeah,
I wonder if that means I'm done.
Yeah.
It doesn't, in my opinion, mean I'm done because I have a way around it, and I'll get to that in a minute. But the third thing I would simply say is we today live linear life. For most of us, well, I guess for all of us, really, we begin as infants. Then we have some time as children. Then we have some time as students. Then we have some time as getting launched in whatever our career might be. Then we have some sort of time of getting better at our career and then storing some nuts away for the winter. And then we retire. I think that's what I would call linear. Mm-hmm. Now, people can spend more time as a student or less time as storing the nuts away for the winter. But nonetheless, even when people were living 40 years or 30 years at the very dawn of human history, and now people's lives, for the most part, are still pretty linear. I would submit to you that one of the most radical things that will ever happen that will limit getting to 150 is that people will not be ready and they'll actually fight it. Society will actually say no. A perfect example of this is, let's just say, and part of my plan is to actually be this person, be 95 and be able to function like a 40-year-old with all that extra knowledge and all that ability. What do we need a 40-year-old for if we have 95-year-olds that have all the experience and ability and none of the downside physiologically? You see, we have aging as a mechanism of creating space for youthful people. We have people staying in houses, for instance, that because of the way it's working out, they're not moving out. And where do you put your family? Because in many parts of the U.S., we have a shortage of homes. Older people are simply saying, because of my tax base, because of my preference, I got 5,000 people. It's just me and the missus, and I'm not moving. So you see this problem of living an awfully long time. It doesn't fit within the structure of how society is organized. Are those three good examples of why getting to 150 is going to be hard?
Oh, yeah, yeah. And so it's going to take a change.
A lot of them.
There's going to have to be a paradigm shift in the future to get us to that place. And if you look at, think of, I think I gave the stat at the very beginning of the interview here of, the average age in the U.S. was 43, and today it's 78. Well, there's been lots of shifts in that time frame, and then moving forward from today into, to the latter 2000s, there's going to be a lot of shifts that are going to take place. Sure. They're going to have to take place.
Just take an example like retirement. Mm-hmm. Retirement, as an example, is something which has not had a long history. Many people trace it back to Germany after World War I, when people were expected to live 2 to 3 years after they stopped working. Mm-hmm. And the government said, oh, well, we'll give them a little bit of money so it's not so painful.
Yeah.
Take the sting off of World War I. Well, now it's turned into basically an expectation. If you do it right, you retire. And if you retire, you get to live for, well, and as it turns out, in the United States, about 20 years. And as it turns out, we have the worst lifespan, health span gap in the world. Most people in the United States that make it to 78 will have acquired one or more chronic diseases by the time they're 60. So imagine that the sentence, if you will, for living the way we are and aspiring to retire is close to 20 years of being sick. I don't think that's winning. I'm sorry. I just don't.
Yeah.
So I don't suggest to anyone else who has as their appetite they want to retire, but I say when you retire, you expire. So don't want that. Now, does that mean that I'm bucking the system? Yeah, because there's there's a whole industry out there. It's
Yeah.
all organized around monetizing. And somebody's going to say, that guy Cofano said no retirement. What the heck?
Yeah. Yeah. No, I feel the same pressures.
Did you know that the record for the longest time a human can hold their breath underwater is 24 minutes and 37.36 seconds, set by Budimir Sobat of Croatia? Did you also know that research found that the microbiota enriched in monks was associated with a reduced risk of anxiety, depression, and cardiovascular disease, and enhanced immune function? The study concluded that meditation plays a positive role in psychosomatic conditions and well-being. A better immune system is not just an outcome of our physiology, it's also impacted by our psychology. This Did You Know moment was brought to you by this week's guest and sponsored by Royal Hospice Oregon.
We have a proposition that we say often on this Aging Today podcast, and that is, when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. And so change is inevitable. It's always going to change. And the way we look at aging, and that's why we've created Aging Today, is we want people to look differently at the aging process. And one of the ways that you're talking about aging is to look at aging a little bit differently. And I think it was you had said that aging is a disease, and that's kind of a foreign concept to most people. Most people just take it, the aging process, as just the normal part of living, which we've been talking about on the linear side. So how is aging a disease, and what are the implications to that? And how can we change the way we look at aging?
Well, let me suggest this. First of all, by saying aging is a disease, it is a personal opinion. Mm-hmm. It's not ratified by every doctor in the world. In fact, there's a lot of people would say that again is crazy talk. Let me make sure that I explain what I say. Aging is a disease in the sense that it is loss of function. So one could say loss of function as I used to be able to walk 5 miles, now I can only walk half a mile. Loss of function is I used to be able to see well, and now I can't see well. Loss of function is my cells used to be able to work a certain way, and now they don't. My immune system used to get me healthier more quickly. I'd simply normalize the conversation of aging to call it loss of function. And we already have plenty of examples of drugs, modalities, protocols for treatment that cause us to not only be able to slow it down, but also go backwards. So therefore, even though it may not be classified, you couldn't probably walk into your primary care physician and say, I've caught aging. He's going to look at you and go, yeah, whatever.
Yeah.
But I think over time, what we're going to see is that different kinds of ways of looking at the human body and understanding the interplay of the many systems will allow the concept of aging to be identified by the medical community as a disease, and for us to live the longest life possible with as little reduction in function.
You know, and it's pretty much common sense when you think about what is it that causes disease, what is it that, and then the disease, has its impact upon our human bodies.
Right.
Most of the things are controllable that are before us.
Boy, you just hit a big old button with me, because I would tell you, as a guy who's lost 75 pounds, gained 15 pounds of lean mass, and I'm doing things not what I used to do, but I'm doing things I never could do before.
Yeah.
That I've actually reversed my age. And no small part of that has become getting very real about one specific thing. We have in our control, and not every one of us, because people are afflicted. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that 201 of us, everybody listening, could do the same things. I have spent the last 4 years optimizing every aspect of my life, every aspect. My body, my mind, my psychology, my heart, I'm speaking my emotion, my relationships, to ultimately become the best version of myself possible. And in the process, I've been rewarded almost anecdotally by becoming much more youthful than I was before.
So give us some examples. Give us some examples of things that you've peeled away from your life First of all, just the physical part of peeling off 75 pounds. What did you do differently besides push away from the table? And then, some of the things that you did, personally in your own psychology and spiritually and it's a total picture is what you're saying.
Absolutely. It is total picture. Thank you. Great question. Great question. On the subject of weight, I didn't diet. I realized I had an unhealthy relationship with food. And I want to say up front, the process of living a long, radically long life is in fact a luxury. It is not affordable by many people. I was in a position to afford it by circumstance and economically. But ultimately I said to myself, Mark, you have stuff in your refrigerator you should never eat. And yet, not only do you eat it, but you eat it unconsciously. I remember one day waking up in the morning and saying, I'm going to eat clean today. And at 11 o'clock, I had a mouthful of potato chips, and I don't even remember putting them in my mouth. I had this reflexive way of using food as a tool to manage distress.
Mm-hmm.
And when I really came to the conclusion, it wasn't going to make a difference how much or little I ate. I was going to be unhealthy because number one, I was eating the wrong stuff. And number two, my relationship to food needed to completely be reoriented. And my mom and my dad were very healthy in that regard. They put good food on the table. They did not encourage overconsumption, but it was for me an emotional trigger. So the weight started falling off when I said to myself, wait a second, be a happy person. Don't use food as a tool to be happy.
Yeah. Did the shift in you move more towards whole foods, plant-based?
Individually foods that I can identify.
Yeah.
Less processed foods, which as it turned out 4 or 5 years ago was more of a innovative way of thinking, but today it's become very mainstream. Don't eat stuff that it's already pre-done and cooked for you. Don't. Just eat things which are all individual ingredients that you can control.
Yeah.
You want to put meat and tomatoes and chicken and, different things into something and cook it, yay, because then you can choose those things. But when you have a laundry list of ingredients on a package and you go, I don't know what that is, that's probably bad. And I would say the average person would benefit by simply classifying food as one of two things, fuel or poison. And I've helped a number of people that are in my friendship circle because I don't do this to make money. I simply say, if it goes in your mouth, it's either fuel or poison. And if it's not fuel, assume it's poison.
Yeah.
In other words, if you're not in a place where you can make a decision, just only eat fuel. And amazingly, gosh darn it, your body starts shedding weight.
Yeah. Yeah. I've noticed the same thing with myself. I was much like yourself. It took a photo of me realizing the extension of my stomach. And I was going, oh my goodness. When you look in the mirror, I didn't see it. I thought I was like, okay, I'm just average, but no, it took a photo and I go, wow, I didn't realize. And it was a photo while I was in the pool with no shirt on that it showed the extended stomach, the bloating. And
you can't run from reality, but that's not the selfie you take on purpose and post on social.
Yeah. Yeah.
So anyway, my point is simply that using that as a very specific example, you asked about other things. I realized it wasn't dieting. I had to change my relationship to food. And when I did, everything became easier. Secondarily, I, through a variety of circumstances, had relocated from one state to another. The second state didn't work out, and I had to complete a third move in 4 years. So in other words, I lived in 3 different states in 4 years. That's very upsetting. I did it all by myself, all by my lonesome, without the support of a significant other and without the direct connection to my family. I mean, they've followed along and certainly been interested, but they've always said, Mark, you got to do what you got to do. So I moved 3 different states. And you know what? I'm in such a wonderful place right now, Arizona. But until I got here, my environment was actually causing me to age. I didn't realize it, but now I can see it. So my point is, another example is optimizing for my environment. And then I happen to move into an amazing place where They have a world-class gym 3 floors down from the floor that I live on. And I never miss a workout because there's never a commute. And I happen to be within walking distance of 150 restaurants. And I happen to live in the sunshine. And when my blinds go up, I get the morning sun into my eyes, which makes my mitochondria light up. And my point is, I'm exploring a kind of behavior that most people don't have the ability to do, but even if they had the ability to do it, they wouldn't, because it might cause them to have to make wholesale changes, really big changes to live better. And I've always said to my corporate audiences when talking about hyperchange, I used to say, have a plan, monitor the plan, execute the plan. And they would always forget because they'd say, well, what am I supposed to do to be better? And I said, let me just make it 2 things. Live in the right place for you, hang with the right people. And if a person can only do those 2 things, they're well on their way to profound life change. So I had to take my own medicine, Mark. I live in the right place and I hang with the right people. I meet so many nice people every day that welcome me. And I have this website, mark150.com, which I just share with people. I say, you want to learn about my journey? Go to mark150.com. So that's an example. And then I had to read more and I had to be more patient and I had to, meditate more and pray more and do all the things necessary to become a better human being. So this is not a just take a pill scenario.
Yeah. Where you, how would you classify yourself? The glass half full, half empty, most of your life?
Yeah. I'm unfortunately into the wildly overfull. I kind of splash water on people.
Yeah.
And actually I could say that I'm too optimistic. And so I've had to become a little less optimistic. But my mindset is everything is wonderful. It's great. It's happy. It gets me through difficult circumstances, but probably I've had to become a little more pragmatic.
Yeah. And then talk a little, so you shed 75 pounds off the food, you've shed 75 pounds off of the environment. What other, and you mentioned a little bit about, relationships and things like that, but is there any other significant aha moments that took place?
Yeah. So I'm involved in a program, and I won't say the name of the company because probably that's not something you want to have happen, but let's just say people can find out about it on my website. I believe that at the end of the day, there is a way for us to be optimized for what we cause ourselves to want to do. And there's an interesting guy, and I will mention his name because he's a doctor. His name is Dr. Peter Attia. And he has a strategy that says if at 100 you want to be able to live a certain kind of life, start practicing that life now. And he has this thing called the centenarian decathlon, the 10 things that you want to be able to do when you get to 100. Like, can you take your bag and put it in the overhead bin? And can you walk your doggy for an hour? Whatever those things are, have sex.
Or just even walk.
Whatever that is.
Yeah.
But my point is, I said to myself, I got to start leading the life I want to live now. And I would tell you that today I consume life like I'm in my early 30s. I do not let into my head any of the psychobabble that comes from society or doctors that says, oh, you're too old for that. No, that doesn't even exist. I'm not too old for anything. I do things that I believe serve me. And the bottom line is it's easier to hurt yourself when you're older in certain kinds of exercises, and it takes longer to rehab yourself. But nonetheless, I'm going to be participating in Spartan races in 2025. Very exciting. And to me, a lot of people would say, are you out of your mind? And I say, no, why? And it's not me trying to prove a point. It's me saying to myself, I've always been competitive. I played a sport in the university, and I've competitively skied, and I've done a lot of interesting things. Why wouldn't I just keep being competitive? Yeah. So mindset-wise, living as if I am young in anticipation, and I'll give you a little bit of a hint as to where I'm going on this. In 6 more years, I get to 75. And at 75, there's going to be a book, and it's called The Halfway Mark. That's a pun.
Mhm.
And the halfway mark is really about my journey to be living life 45 years old biologically and 75 years old in terms of chronological years.
Mhm.
And for all those naysayers that you mentioned earlier, some people would say, well, that's just, you know what, crazy. And I would say, unless, of course, you happen to know about the Rejuvenation Olympics, where there's actually people that, like, I know somebody who's 62 and he's biologically 38. So I'm standing on the shoulder of giants, people that have done it far better than me. But I am telling you that the thing I'm doing that probably is more important than any for some of your audience, I started at 65. This whole business is about it's too late. Let's get rid of that idea. I was the poster child for it's too late. 75 pounds
Mhm.
too heavy, 65 years of age, at a time when everyone's saying, aren't you going to retire, Mark? And I'm going, no, no,
Yeah.
I'm not. So hopefully that maybe puts a wrapper around the overall subject of the individual things like losing weight and getting stronger. Be optimum.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember my grandfather, very wise individual, very successful individual, and he pulled out of his wallet one day and I said, what made you so successful? And he had this little saying. It said, never be associated with failure. In other words, what he was saying, just in a different way in his generation, surround yourself. He said, Mark, surround yourself with people that are more brilliant than you.
Absolutely.
Do not be offended. Do not, it's easy to get jealous or whatever. Just surround yourself with people that think positive and think outside the box and are moving forward with their lives. And don't surround yourself with people that are the naysayers, the people that are going to pull you down, is what he was
Oh
saying.
man, is that so true?
Yeah.
And interestingly enough, in that, Mark, your grandfather is a wise person. No small part of my desire to last longer is I want to take people such as yourself and people such as your grandfather and cause them to last longer to be able to share what
Mhm.
they've learned. Isn't it ironic, as an example, that we get to a point in time where we arrive at 60, and this is when we start to get our first chronic illness, and we start to think, oh, maybe I'm done. Maybe I
Yeah.
need to start
Yeah.
thinking about selling the company or whatever. And I'm saying, no, the world needs the older, more mature voice, moderated, of course, to allow younger people to continue to create. But I want to keep the brightest of the world around for a lot longer to share what they learned.
Yeah.
I
And
wish I'd gotten to know your grandfather.
yeah, yeah. I wish he had been longer in my life, but very blessed to have a grandfather like that was very involved in our lives at the time that had to spend together. One of the things I was also thinking about was, just the whole idea of wisdom and knowledge. So we're churning out a lot of people with a lot of knowledge, and one thing that is lacking in our culture today, I believe, is wisdom. It's the hakma, is what they call it in the Hebrew. Hakma means literally wisdom, and it's living life skillfully. And it's just not about knowledge. And this is where the young people, if we could interact more succinctly with each other, more often with each other, and there's a better respect between the generations, there's a lot that can be done with that knowledge as long as it's coupled with wisdom.
And respect. Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. All voices are valuable. And when we start to stereotype and when we use social media to cancel people and we don't welcome people to say what's on their mind, that's not a good thing.
Yeah.
I will tell you an interesting thing that's happened to me as it relates to the generational issue of longevity. Do you want to know the most interesting question I receive from young people after they meet me at the swimming pool and they say, I've heard about you, or, you really look XYZ good, whatever. Do you know what the number one second question is?
Yeah.
Would you talk to my parents?
Oh, yeah, that makes sense.
There is a lot of pain in young people
Yeah.
because they see the wisdom and they see the love and the affection and the opportunity to be with their parents.
Yeah.
And they see them, in some cases, being close to their end because of life choices that they've made. One drink turns into two, and 20 pounds turns into 50, and all of a sudden they're unable to do things they used to do. And that's okay, honey. You go and do it by yourself. And I probably will put a seminar series together where I will cause young people to feel like they can invite their parents to a round table, get a lot of people in the room that says, Mom and Dad, it's okay if you don't want to, but if you do want to, you got a lot more years in front of you.
Yeah. I would venture to guess that most people have a roadmap that is traditionally designed, which you described earlier in our conversation about, that linear. And when we retire, then we know that, we've got 10, 15 years left and we're going to be gone. And I think most people prepare their minds that way and they start living their lives that way. And it's a prophecy that is easily fulfilled.
Absolutely. And if you think about when you're driving on the freeway, you've probably had that experience where you're paying attention to your map, you're paying attention, and then you kind of get into a zone thinking about where you're going or something else. And all of a sudden you see the exit and you're supposed to be 2 lanes over to take the exit, right? And you see it coming up on you and you realize you're going to miss the exit. And, there's that old adage, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take.
Mm-hmm.
You miss 100% of the exits you don't see.
Mm-hmm.
What I think is the humorous part about this is that our society that quote unquote cares about us has made some of the choices invisible. That's the only thing I seek to do. I don't want to change anybody's behavior.
Yeah.
I just want them to see the exit or the on-ramp that's available to them with enough time to decide if it's relevant.
What is the role of, as we progress with AI, what do you see the role of AI playing in our longevity?
Well,
and we'll conclude with that because there's so much more that we can talk about, and it's very inspiring to have this conversation with you.
Thank you. Let's assume a benevolent AI, because the reality is that I come from the world where not everything by definition is as it seems. And being an architect and creator of a lot of technology over the course of my life, I would say that we've created a system which is too profit-based. Okay. So let's just agree that in a world where profit wasn't the principal driver for how AI was going to be used, this is my answer. In theory, AI at the very level of the human body would allow us to understand the human body much faster than science. We have limits in terms of what kinds of experiments we can perform on people. We have limits in terms of what kinds of drugs we can create. We have limits in terms of all the things that science currently knows how to do because it's so expensive and so dangerous to try to come up with new ways of doing things. AI is wonderful at simulating. Mm-hmm. So it's possible, as an example. And I was at a very wonderful place called the Terasaki Institute. It's one of the most amazing places that has to do with organ regeneration. And I don't know if a lot of people understand, but there's only about 43,000 organ transplants that occur every year in the United States. It's not like 5 million.
Yeah.
It's yeah. And we need a lot more.
Yeah.
We actually need to create synthetic organs, and we need to create ways to keep transplanted organs alive longer, because typically 5 years or 6 years or 7, and then the transplant goes, south. But anyway, I'm in this place and they have this machine and he says, there's 10,000 people in that black box. It's about 8 foot by 8 foot by 8 foot. And I went, 10,000 people in the black box. It's 8 foot on a side. He said, yeah. And I said, well, what do you mean? He says, well, there's a biological structure called an organoid. And the organoid, each of them is unique and different. And we can actually do testing using AI and the organoids to either give them all a disease or a virus or give them all a drug. And we can do in a very short period of time what it would take, what we'd have to have 10,000 people, real human beings, to do to find out if they all got sick from this one virus or if this one medicine had an implication for 50% of them that wasn't good. So the answer is, on the biological side of things, AI is going to rapidly expand, increase, and improve the quality, even to the point in time of creating drugs we didn't think personally to create.
Yeah.
Because AI is getting to a place now where we can say, yeah, maybe we need a drug to deal with this hay flick limit. Okay, so that's on the side of the actual science and medicine. On the side of behavior, let me just tell you, if everybody was looking for a magical pill, the pill is discipline. It's a bitter pill.
Uh-huh.
What I've learned to do, and it's not my nature, is not procrastinate and be disciplined. And if somebody wants to follow me, they are probably already smarter than I am. They probably got a lot of advantages, but my ace in the hole might be that I am much less of a procrastinator and much more disciplined. And AI has a way of potentially being in our hand, and you're starting to see this now in the latest models of these phones. You're going to have your own AI. Again, in the world where it's beneficial. Hi, what do you think I should do today? I think you should get out of bed now because you told me you're gonna. Oh, can I have this? No, you can't because we already agreed you weren't going to eat that. But here's something better. And if you turn right, you'll find that there's a store that has that. Oh, great. So my point is a lot of the left and right turns
Uh-huh.
associated with how do you do longevity are going to be provided by a personal AI. And AI is going to basically be a benefactor to us, and it's going to help us supplant our discipline and our potential procrastination and do better.
Yeah.
So those are probably two good examples of where AI shows up. There's others, of course, but
Yeah. How far
hopefully
are we out? How far are we going to have to wait before
some of that
we
exists
start?
now.
Yeah.
I have a Samsung Smart Ring and a
Mhm.
Samsung phone. If you're an Apple person, you get an Apple phone and an Oura Ring. I know I probably shouldn't state brands, but the whole point is to create value for your
Right.
listeners.
Right. What's a
If you
ring?
have a
I've never heard of
smartphone
the
and a
ring.
smartwatch and a smart ring, you get AI built in now.
Yeah.
That in the middle of the night, it's monitoring 63 different variables about your sleep or
Uh-huh.
about your behavior, about your food. And then the next morning when you wake up, it goes, your energy score is this, your rest score is this, this is symptomatic. This you did great on. Why don't you try this? That's now.
Yeah.
So
When you see the results of, let's say, sleep patterns, okay, so and I've not heard of the ring, by the way. So that is like the watch, but only on your finger, and it's measuring. What's it measuring? And then, but I wanted to get back to, getting this data, especially during sleep, because sleep is so important to our longevity and to our
oh my gosh.
health during the day. I mean,
Probably more consequential than any other thing, including food.
yeah.
If you screw up sleep, everything is simply a Band-Aid.
So how do you learn from that? I mean, what do you take away to get into a better rhythm of sleep tomorrow night?
Well, let me tell you, first of all, I've been also almost always blessed with better sleep than average because of something I did when I was 14. When I was 14, I used to have night terrors. I would
Mm.
wake up 3 miles beneath the ocean and I would have to swim to the top really fast to not drown. It was not a fun way to wake up.
Hmm.
And I learned something that was actually very helpful to me. And it was to regard my life as ending every night when I put my head on the pillow. So I believe that people worry too much at night. They put tomorrow into today.
Yeah.
If people need to pick a time on their calendar, the 15 minutes that today I'm going to worry about everything, then they can say I worried and be done with it. But for me, the first thing that I did that not everybody would have accomplished yet is I don't worry when I go to bed. I put my head on the pillow and it's my time to sleep. But did I always go to sleep at the same approximate time? Nope. Did I sometimes use my phone right up to the last minute and get a lot of light in my eyes that would change my circadian rhythm? Yup. Did I sometimes be in a place where I don't have my room quiet and completely appropriate for sleep? Yeah. I learned all those things are called sleep hygiene. And each person with their physiology, the pillow, the way for instance, I didn't know, but if you sleep on one side of your body versus the other side of your body, it actually affects your digestion and your heart.
Hmm.
And that's because your heart is on one side of your body than the other.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if you're a back sleeper, like for instance, my sleep thing tells me if I snore. And the end result is I've had it for about 2 months now. Oh my goodness. I sleep so much better because my hygiene is better.
Uh-huh.
And it compliments me. Good job, Mark. Also kicks me in the butt every once in a while. Yeah, you didn't do good at that at all. So there's some value to having that alter ego,
Yeah.
the AI over your shoulder. But it definitely makes a big difference.
What are some of the resources that you've gone to learn about your sleep hygiene? Can you share some of those with us?
Well, I guess I probably read 10 different people, Huberman, Tia, Mark, I think his last name is Weiland. I read everybody on
Yeah.
sleep because it's the number one thing. And what I would also tell you is, you basically have to do a little bit of philosophy too. For me, that concept of finishing your life when you put your head on the pillow, it's a subset of something called the big rocks. Big rocks say, take a jar, you want to fill it up to the maximum extent. You put the big rocks in first. If you fill it all with water, there's no room for the big rocks. If you fill it all up with sand, there's no room for, smaller rocks. So you put the biggest rocks in, smaller rocks, sand, and even when it appears to be completely full, you can still put water in. If you want your life to be as full as possible, do the big things first. If you have to say you're sorry to somebody, say sorry today. If you have to get your exercise in before today ends. Put the most important stuff first. So when you sleep, there's less to worry about. And then on the subject of hygiene in general, man, all you have to do is put in sleep hygiene or smart ring or sleep better, and you're going to get a jillion different responses. And most of them are going to be good, but they're going to tell you stuff you don't like. See, that's back to the issue of discipline. I have people tell me, I know you're going to tell me to stop drinking. And I'm going to say, no, I'm not. I still enjoy a very occasional drink. But the amount of alcohol I consume is far less because I want it far less. When someone says, but I like to stay up and watch my show, I say, do you have a counterbalance that you want to actually live longer and actually be happier, which is at least as great as you wanting to watch your show? If the answer is no, I have no answer for them. The whole issue of longevity, esoterically, isn't about just how many years. It's what would you do with them? We have a platform called Max Years, and it's under development. And the whole concept is to get people a way to do longevity, not what to do. Some people are going to get to longevity very differently than others, but everyone has to have discipline, not procrastinate, and actually decide what they'll give up because they want to give it up, not because someone's telling them.
Yeah, not compelled. It never lasts.
Doesn't.
Yeah.
All life change is driven by the fact that we are, for all intents and purposes, self-serving creatures.
Yeah.
We make the best decisions for ourselves, and out of respect. I'm guessing you have children. I do. My whole point is you have to respect the individual's ability to decide for themselves. You want to inform them, of course, and keep them from making the really tragic mistakes.
Yeah.
But nothing teaches like pain.
Yeah. Yeah.
When I got an 88 sleep score and my rest score was 81, and then I went and had a workout, I was like a different guy showed up in the gym. And I didn't correlate the first two until I was done with my workout. And I went, oh, that's what they're talking about.
Yeah.
But if you didn't actually have the data, what would you do to produce another great workout day? So I use those tools to backfill to the fact that I got to get good sleep. And when my behavior is not so hot, like I try to eat my last meal, the last food goes in my mouth around 6:00. And I typically go to bed around 9. It's typically an uncomfortable window for me, and I have to protect myself from my natural snacky nature, even if I'm eating something snacky good, right? because the last 3 hours means I go to bed with an empty tummy, which means none of my biology is actually using energy while I'm sleeping to digest stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I have to get to the point in time where I get the right amount of fluid in my body, not too much, so I don't want to wake up and pee.
Mm-hmm.
It very seldom ever happens, but it did happen more when I would drink a whole bunch of water 30 minutes before I go to bed. So
when's the last time you drink water typically?
well, I'll drink a little bit of water right before bed, but it's just a swallow or two.
Yeah. Yeah.
Does that make sense? And
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
some part of that might actually be an emotional holdover. I like the idea of my throat is not dry or parched, but from the standpoint of any quantity, a couple hours.
Yeah. Most of the water or fluids that you put into your body are done during the day.
No, I drink all the time, but virtually not at all. Like I said, food stops about 3 hours before I go to bed, and liquids stop about 2 hours.
Yeah.
And when I wake up, I'm plenty thirsty. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
But my sleep is not being interrupted by things that I could change.
Sure.
Having a dark room, important. Having a cool room, important.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, those are all details. But my point is deciding that sleep comes first and using it as a lever. If you don't have stress because you've slept well, it's easier to change your orientation to food. If you've slept well and your orientation to food changes, it's easier to get your butt to the gym. If you get your butt to the gym and all of a sudden you lose a size, it's easier to go clothes shopping and feel better about yourself. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
I got a non-surgical facelift.
Mm-hmm.
Now people would say, oh, don't tell people that that's the case. No, I want to tell them because it's something that was a procedure that was a day-long procedure, no knives, no scalpels, but there's new technology that lets you then basically shrink your skin to fit your face. That's the nice lady who did my procedure. She says, Mark, we're going to shrink your skin to fit your face. I'm going, that sounds good.
Yeah.
Right? You eliminate the Sherpa doggy effect and get rid of all the age spots and the whole 9 yards. And it was super inexpensive by virtue of every measure. And I'm saying to myself, does how you feel you look change how you interact with other people? Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Does how you walk confidently change how you interact with other people? Yes. Does how you sit in your chair, posture erect, change how your digestive system works? So no small part of my journey, Mark, has been to truly understand the myriad of things, the small little adjustments that profoundly contribute to the global issue of living longer.
Yeah. Well, maybe this is a really good place for us to end. Great conversation. We're just hitting the tip of the iceberg here.
Yeah, there's more to talk about.
Oh, there's so much more.
One real quick question, though, we didn't exactly answer. You said, how? Let me just make sure to address that very specific question.
YB8.
Why? The how is this. If you want to fly to Zurich, I don't know where you live exactly, but my bet is you have to go from where you're sitting to an international airport.
Mm-hmm.
And when you get to the international airport, and if you have a seat and you actually are ready and you're there at the right time, you'll get to Zurich. But if those things aren't true, you're not going to Zurich. And it's interesting that I want you to think about, and perhaps we could do another talk on this some point in time. I believe that living to 150 is a connecting flight from 100. When I get to 100, I want to be one of the people ready for what I believe is the new wave of science, so that when the many companies that can repair a knee, improve the cardiovascular system, improve the cadence and the volume of my lungs are ready, they're going to say, let's pick him. He gets to get on the flight.
Uh-huh.
So instead of having to age to 150, the same way I'm aging from 69 to 100, I believe in approximately 30 years, a profound change in options is going to be there, but it's not going to be there for most people that are nearing 100 because they're not going to optimize themselves from now till then. So That's the how. The how is getting to the connecting flight and making sure that I have the money, the time, the connections, the relationship, and the plan so I can say, okay, I'm going to 150. Is that helpful?
Absolutely. And if there's others that are listening that want to jump on board with your journey, how would they best get in touch with you?
Mark150.com. That's Mark with a K, MARK 150.com. Please go sign up. The site is almost finished, but you have to basically kind of just keep doing things.
Yeah.
And I would love to talk to every single person with the goal of sharing with them. It's a choice. If this is what's good for you, do it.
That's a great place to stop. And Mark, thank you so much for being on Aging Today. And we'll have you back again because, like I said, we've only touched the surface. We've only touched the tip of the iceberg. There's so much more that we can discuss because I think that, one of my goals is with Aging Today is to educate people on the aging process. And aging is not a bad thing. It just doesn't have to be that way. And it's going to take a mindset change. When you change the way you look at aging, aging will change. But it comes from within me. It's got to start here.
Thank you for the good work you do. This is very valuable, and I truly appreciate being on your podcast.
All right. This is Mark Turnbull, your host, and I want to thank all of you for tuning in to Aging Today. We are the podcast where together we're exploring the many ways to options to aging on your terms. Join us every Monday when we release a new conversation on Aging Today to your favorite podcast channel. And remember this, we're all in the process of aging. And as we age, we really are better together. So stay young at heart.
You make me feel so young. You make me feel like spring has sprung. And every time I see your face, I'm such a happy individual the moment that you speak. I want to go play hide and seek. I want to go and bounce the moon just like a toy balloon. Well, you and I are just like a couple of tots running across the meadow, picking up lots of forget-me-nots. So you made me feel so young. You made me feel there are songs to be sung, bells to be rung, and a wonderful fling to be flung. And even when I'm old and gray.
You've been listening to Aging Today, where together we explore the options to aging on your terms. Join Mark and his guest next week for another lively discussion on proactively aging on your terms, connecting you to the professional advice of his special guests, with the goal of creating better days throughout the aging process. Your host has been Mark Turnbull. Join Mark and his guests every week on Aging Today, your podcast to exploring your options for aging on your terms.
And even when I'm old and gray, you make me feel the way I feel today. 'Cause you make me feel so. You make me feel so. You make me feel so young. So young. You make me feel so young. You make me feel so young.